Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and felt an entire universe open between you, yet somehow no words came out? Not because you had nothing to say, not because the feelings weren't real, but because they were almost too real. How can two people feel everything and still say nothing? This is one of the greatest paradoxes of the twin flame connection. The love feels undeniable, electric, magnetic. It feels like recognition rather than attraction, as if your soul whispered, "There you are. I've been looking for you." And yet, despite this overwhelming emotional current, something strange happens. Silence. Not the peaceful kind, not the comfortable kind, but the kind filled with unsent messages, swallowed confessions, and conversations that play out only in your head. Why? Why would two people who feel such profound love hesitate to speak openly? Why does the very intensity that draws them together also seem to close their throats when it matters most? Picture this. You meet someone, and from the very first interaction something shifts inside you. It's not just physical chemistry. It's not just shared interests. It's deeper. The eye contact lingers longer than usual. There's a strange familiarity, as if you've known them beyond this lifetime, or at least beyond this moment. When they speak, it feels like they are answering questions you never voiced. When you sit in silence together, it feels charged, not awkward. Alive. Electric. And yet, when it comes time to say the big things, I feel this too. You matter to me. I'm afraid of losing you. I love you. The words stay trapped somewhere between the heart and the mouth. Why does that happen? Is it fear? Is it timing? Or is it something deeper? Something rooted in the very nature of this kind of connection? Twin flame love doesn't feel casual. It doesn't unfold gently. It arrives like a storm, beautiful, powerful, impossible to ignore. It shakes foundations. It exposes hidden emotions. It awakens parts of you that have been dormant for years. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Not everyone is ready for that level of awakening. Because when someone loves you in a way that feels soul deep, it doesn't just make you feel chosen. It makes you feel seen. Completely seen. And being seen can be terrifying. It means your masks don't work anymore. Your rehearsed lines don't impress. Your carefully built walls start to crack. Around this person, you can't pretend as easily. You can't hide the insecurities. You can't fully suppress the vulnerability. So instead of speaking openly, many twin flames retreat into silence. They feel everything but say nothing. Have you noticed how intense connections often come with intense hesitation? The stronger the emotion, the more cautious the behavior. It's almost paradoxical. You would think deep love would inspire bold declarations. Instead, it often inspires restraint. Because deep love raises the stakes. When the feelings are shallow, rejection doesn't wound as deeply. When the connection feels replaceable, vulnerability feels manageable. But when it feels once in a lifetime, when it feels sacred, suddenly every word carries weight. What if I say it and they don't feel the same? What if I open my heart and they pull away? What if this connection is fragile and my honesty breaks it? So both stand there, hearts racing, waiting for the other to move first, waiting for a sign, waiting for certainty in a connection that was never meant to feel certain. Because twin flame love rarely feels safe in the traditional sense. Feels expansive, feels awakening, feels transformative. And transformation is rarely comfortable. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff with someone you love deeply. The view is breathtaking. The air is electric. But below you is the unknown. To step forward requires trust. Not just in them, but in yourself. And that's where the silence begins. Not because the love is absent, but because it's overwhelming. There is also another layer to this silence, one that many don't talk about. Sometimes twin flames believe the other already knows. The connection feels so intuitive, so energetically aligned, that words seem unnecessary. There's a belief that eye contact is enough, that subtle gestures say everything, that the unspoken bond is stronger than language. But is it? Or is that belief simply a safer alternative to risking vulnerability? Because as powerful as energetic connection can be, human relationships still live in the physical world. And in this world, words matter. Unspoken love can be felt, but it can also be misunderstood. Have you ever assumed someone knew how you felt, only to realize later they were just as unsure as you? That's the silent tragedy of many twin flame dynamics. Both feel deeply, both sense the connection, but both are afraid to shatter the fragile equilibrium with direct honesty. So they circle each other emotionally. They communicate through glances, through subtle messages, through social media hints, through almost confessions, but rarely through direct, grounded truth. And the tension builds, because intense love without open expression doesn't disappear. It compresses. It simmers beneath the surface. It shows up in restless nights, in songs that suddenly feel too relatable, in random memories that surface at inconvenient times. It shows up in the way your chest tightens when their name appears on your phone. If the love is mutual, why not say it? If the connection is real, why hide it? Could it be that the very depth of the bond exposes fears we didn't know we carried? Perhaps the silence isn't about the other person at all. Perhaps it's about what this love forces us to confront within ourselves. Because twin flame connections are not just romantic experiences. They are mirrors. They reflect back your strengths, yes, but also your wounds, your insecurities, your fear of abandonment, your fear of rejection, your fear of not being enough. And when those fears rise to the surface, the instinct is often self-protection. Silence becomes armor. Distance becomes control. Indifference becomes a disguise. But underneath it all, the love remains. So here we are, faced with the central paradox. How can two souls feel so magnetically connected and still struggle to speak their truth? Is it destiny testing them? Is it ego protecting them? Or is it the simple human fear of being emotionally naked in front of someone who matters too much? In this video, we're going to peel back the layers behind this silence. We're going to explore the psychology, the emotional triggers, the ego defenses, and the spiritual lessons that keep twin flames from speaking openly, even when the love between them feels undeniable. Because the silence isn't random, it has roots. And once you understand those roots, the connection begins to make more sense. So if you've ever felt the intensity, if you've ever held back words that burned in your chest, if you've ever wondered why love so strong can still feel so restrained, stay with me. Let's explore what truly keeps twin flames silent, and what it takes for that silence to finally break. If we want to understand why twin flames struggle to speak openly, we first have to understand the nature of what they're experiencing. Because this isn't ordinary attraction. It's not a simple crush. It's not just chemistry. It's not even just falling in love. Feels like recognition. Many people describe their twin flame encounter as a moment of remembering rather than meeting. There is an immediate familiarity that defies logic. You may not know their favorite color yet. You may not know their childhood story. But somehow, your nervous system reacts as if you do. Have you ever met someone and felt strangely calm and electrified at the same time? That paradox, safety and intensity coexisting, is one of the defining features of a twin flame connection. It's as if your soul relaxes while your ego panics. And that's where the complexity begins. The emotional magnification effect. In most relationships, emotions build gradually. Affection grows through shared experiences. Trust develops over time. Vulnerability unfolds step by step. With twin flames, the emotional acceleration can feel almost unnatural. Within a short time, conversations feel deeper. Eye contact feels longer. Silences feel louder. You may find yourself sharing thoughts you don't normally reveal. Or you may feel the urge to, and that urge alone can be unsettling. Why does everything feel amplified? Because twin flame intensity works like an emotional magnifier. Whatever you feel around this person is heightened. Joy feels euphoric. Desire feels magnetic. Longing feels unbearable. Fear feels paralyzing. It's not that the emotions are new. It's that they are intensified. And when emotions are magnified, so are vulnerabilities. If you already struggle with self-doubt, this connection may make that doubt louder. If you carry abandonment wounds, the fear of losing this person may feel catastrophic. If you value control, the unpredictability of the connection may feel threatening. The intensity doesn't just highlight love. It highlights everything. And that level of exposure can make open communication feel risky. The mirror effect. One of the most talked about aspects of twin flame dynamics is the mirror effect. This doesn't mean they are identical to you in personality. In fact, they may seem very different on the surface. But emotionally and energetically, They reflect back your inner world. They trigger what you haven't healed. They awaken what you've suppressed. They challenge what you've avoided. If you fear vulnerability, they will make you want to be vulnerable. If you fear rejection, they will stir situations that test that fear. If you struggle with self-worth, loving them may force you to confront how you truly see yourself. That mirroring can feel uncomfortable, even destabilizing. Imagine looking into a mirror that doesn't just show your appearance, but your hidden emotions, your insecurities, your unresolved pain. Would you immediately feel safe enough to speak openly? Or would you hesitate? Because speaking openly in this kind of connection often means confronting parts of yourself you're not fully at peace with yet. And that's where silence begins to feel like protection. Intensity feels like loss of control. Another defining feature of twin flame intensity is the sense of losing control. You may pride yourself on being rational, grounded, independent, emotionally contained. Then suddenly this person enters your life, and your emotional equilibrium shifts. You think about them unexpectedly. You feel their absence intensely. You notice how deeply their mood affects yours. Can feel disorienting. And when we feel out of control, our instinct is often to regain stability. Sometimes that stability comes through emotional withdrawal, through holding back words, through pretending the feelings aren't as strong as they are. Because admitting how much someone affects you requires surrender. And surrender can be terrifying, especially if you've built your identity around strength, independence, or self-protection. Twin flame intensity doesn't politely knock on the door of your heart. Kicks it open. And not everyone is ready to let the storm move through. The nervous system reaction. There's also a psychological and physiological layer to this intensity. When you encounter someone who feels deeply significant, your nervous system reacts. Increased heart rate, heightened awareness, emotional alertness. You may feel energized or anxious. Sometimes both. If you have unresolved trauma or attachment wounds, this heightened state can be misinterpreted by your body as danger. Even if consciously you feel love, your nervous system may still respond with fight, flight, or freeze. For some twin flames, silence is the freeze response. The feelings are too strong. The stakes feel too high. So instead of expressing, they shut down. Not because they don't care, but because their system is overwhelmed. Have you ever wanted to say something important, but when the moment came, your mind went blank? That's not indifference. That's overload. And twin flame intensity can create exactly that kind of emotional overload. Why intensity creates hesitation? It might seem counterintuitive. Shouldn't strong love inspire boldness? Sometimes it does. But often, strong love increases perceived risk. If this person feels ordinary, losing them feels manageable. If this person feels extraordinary, losing them feels devastating. So the mind begins to calculate. If I say too much, I might scare them away. If I reveal how deeply I feel, I might lose leverage. If I admit my fears, I might look weak. The irony is that the connection itself often craves honesty, but the ego fears exposure. And when ego and heart clash, silence becomes the compromise. The spiritual shockwave. Many who describe twin flame experiences talk about a kind of spiritual awakening that accompanies the connection. Suddenly you question your patterns. You reflect on your past relationships. You become more aware of your emotional habits. It's as if this person activates growth. But growth can feel destabilizing. When your identity starts shifting, when your old coping mechanisms stop working, when you begin confronting deeper truths about yourself, it's not always easy to articulate what you're going through. Sometimes you don't even have the language for it yet. So instead of explaining, you withdraw. Instead of speaking, you process internally. And the other person may interpret that silence as distance, when in reality, it's transformation happening beneath the surface. The paradox of feeling understood, yet misunderstood. Another unique aspect of twin flame intensity is the sense of being deeply understood on a soul level. You may feel that they get you without explanation, that they sense your emotions before you speak them, that your connection transcends words. But here's the paradox. Feeling understood energetically doesn't eliminate the need for communication. In fact, it can create a dangerous assumption. They already know how I feel. But assumptions leave room for doubt. What if they're feeling the same intensity, and also assuming you already know. Two people deeply connected, both believing words are unnecessary. And in that space, silence grows. The truth about intensity. Twin flame intensity is not designed to make things easy. It's designed to make things real. It strips away superficial interaction. It challenges emotional immaturity. It exposes insecurity. It magnifies both love and fear. And until both individuals learn to regulate that intensity, to sit with it rather than run from it, open communication can feel overwhelming. So when you ask, if the love is so deep, why don't they speak? The answer may not be lack of feeling. It may be the opposite. The feelings are so strong that they don't yet know how to hold them, let alone express them. Because intense love doesn't just require courage. It requires emotional capacity. And building that capacity takes time. In the next part, we'll explore one of the most powerful forces behind this silence. The fear of emotional exposure. What happens when someone sees you so clearly that hiding is no longer an option? If twin flame intensity magnifies emotions, then emotional exposure becomes unavoidable. And for many people, that is where the real fear begins. It's one thing to feel deeply. It's another thing to be seen deeply. When you stand in front of someone who seems to look past your surface, past your personality, your achievements, your charm, and into your fears, your wounds, your insecurities, something inside you reacts. Because being fully seen is both a gift and a threat. Twin flame connections often carry this unsettling quality. You cannot hide as easily. Around this person, your usual defenses don't work the same way. You may notice they pick up on subtle mood shifts. They sense when you're holding back. They ask questions that cut straight to the core. And suddenly you feel transparent. Have you ever felt like someone could read you without trying? Not in a dramatic, mystical way, but in a way that makes you slightly uncomfortable because you realize your mask isn't as solid as you thought. That's emotional exposure. And emotional exposure feels dangerous when you've spent years protecting yourself. The armor we build. Before twin flames meet, both individuals have lived full lives. They've experienced rejection, disappointment, betrayal, abandonment, criticism, loss. And over time, whether consciously or unconsciously, they build armor. Some people build intellectual armor, staying logical, detached, analytical. Some build emotional armor, minimizing feelings, avoiding vulnerability. Some build independence armor. I don't need anyone. Some build performance armor, becoming impressive, strong, successful. Armor is not weakness. It's survival. But twin flame love has a way of gently, or sometimes forcefully, removing that armor. And that can feel terrifying. Because once the armor comes off, what's left? The parts of you that feel unworthy. The parts that fear abandonment. The parts that still carry old shame. When someone loves you deeply, it doesn't just feel flattering. Feels exposing. And if you secretly question whether you deserve that love, you may struggle to accept it openly. The fear of being fully known. Many people think the biggest fear in love is rejection. But often the deeper fear is being fully known. Because if someone sees all of you, your light and your shadow, and then rejects you, that feels devastating. It confirms your worst self-doubts. So what's the safer option? Don't show everything. Hold something back. Keep certain emotions unspoken. Stay slightly mysterious. Slightly guarded. In twin flame connections, however, that strategy becomes harder to maintain. The emotional intensity naturally invites deeper honesty. You may feel the urge to confess things you've never said out loud. You may want to tell them about your fears, your childhood wounds, your hidden dreams. But the moment that urge rises, so does panic. What if they think I'm too much? What if they see how insecure I really am? What if they realize I'm not as strong as I appear? So instead of speaking, you swallow the words. And the silence grows heavier. When love touches old wounds, emotional exposure doesn't just reveal your present feelings. It activates your past. If you were once abandoned, loving someone deeply can reactivate that memory. If you were once betrayed, opening your heart can feel reckless. If you were once told you were too sensitive, expressing emotions may feel unsafe. Twin flames don't create these wounds, they illuminate them. And illumination can feel uncomfortable. Imagine loving someone so deeply that you realize how much you fear losing them. That realization alone can be destabilizing. You may start analyzing every interaction. You may become hyper-aware of changes in tone. You may interpret neutral moments as signs of distance. And instead of saying, "I'm scared of losing you," you stay silent, because admitting fear feels vulnerable. But silence doesn't remove the fear, just hides it. The illusion of strength. In many twin flame dynamics, one or both partners feel the need to appear strong. They may think, "I don't want to look needy. I don't want to overwhelm them. I don't want to seem emotionally dependent." So they understate their feelings. They respond calmly when they want to express passion. They act indifferent when they feel longing. They maintain composure when they want to confess love. From the outside, this looks like emotional control. But underneath, it's often fear of exposure. Because to say, "You matter deeply to me," is to risk hearing, "I don't feel the same." And when the connection feels once in a lifetime, that risk feels enormous. The shame of needing someone. There's another layer that often goes unspoken. Needing someone can feel shameful. Modern culture glorifies independence, self-sufficiency, emotional detachment. "I'm fine on my own." So when twin flame love awakens a profound longing, a desire for closeness, reassurance, emotional intimacy, it can clash with your self-image. You may think, "I shouldn't need this much. I should be stronger than this. Why does this affect me so deeply?" Instead of honoring the feeling, you judge it. And when you judge your own vulnerability, you're less likely to express it. So the silence continues. The risk of authenticity. Authenticity sounds empowering in theory. Just be yourself. Speak your truth. Open your heart. But in practice, authenticity requires courage. Means saying, "I care more than I let on. I was hurt when you pulled away. I'm afraid this connection might not last. I love you." Those words carry weight. They expose the softest parts of you. And when someone holds the power to hurt you, even unintentionally, vulnerability feels like stepping into the unknown without armor. So many twin flames hover in emotional limbo. They feel everything. They sense the depth. They know the love is real. But they hesitate to verbalize it fully. Because speaking transforms internal emotion into external reality. And once it's spoken, it can't be taken back. The paradox of safety and danger. Here's the paradox. Twin flame connections often feel like the safest emotional space you've ever encountered, and the most dangerous. Safe because you feel understood. Dangerous because you feel exposed. Safe because the bond feels natural. Dangerous because the stakes feel high. This internal contradiction creates tension. You want to lean in. You want to pull back. You want to confess. You want to protect yourself. And in that tug of war, silence often wins. What if they see the real me? At the core of emotional exposure is one haunting question. If they see the real me, will they still stay? That question doesn't always sit at the surface. Sometimes it hides beneath pride, beneath avoidance, beneath delayed responses and guarded conversations. But it's there. And until that fear is addressed, open communication feels like walking into emotional risk without certainty of return. So twin flames often communicate indirectly, through energy, through symbolism, through subtle gestures, but not always through direct truth, because direct truth requires self-acceptance. And sometimes the hardest part isn't believing they love you. It's believing you're lovable, fully and perfectly, authentically, breaking the pattern. Emotional exposure becomes less frightening when you begin accepting yourself, when you stop judging your own needs, when you stop shaming your own vulnerability, when you recognize that longing is not weakness, it's humanity. Twin flame love doesn't demand perfection. It demands honesty. But honesty starts within. Until you are comfortable seeing yourself clearly, flaws and all, being seen by someone else will always feel threatening. So the silence between twin flames is not just about fear of rejection. It's about fear of exposure. Fear of standing emotionally naked in front of someone who matters more than anyone else. And yet that very exposure is what creates true intimacy. The question becomes, will you continue protecting your heart from possible pain? Or will you risk vulnerability for the possibility of deeper connection? Because intense love can survive distance. It can survive timing. It can survive confusion. but it struggles to thrive in silence born from fear. And in the next part, we'll explore how ego, the silent guardian of pride and control, plays its own powerful role in keeping twin flames from speaking openly. If fear of emotional exposure explains why twin flames hesitate to speak, the mirror effect explains why the silence can feel so intense. Because twin flames don't just awaken love, they awaken pain. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but inevitably. The mirror effect is one of the most misunderstood aspects of this connection. Many people imagine it means twin flames are identical, same personalities, same behaviors, same life paths. But that's rarely the case. The mirror effect operates at a deeper level. They reflect your unresolved wounds. They amplify your insecurities. They trigger emotional patterns you thought you had already outgrown. And when those old wounds rise to the surface, communication becomes complicated. Why the mirror feels so uncomfortable? In everyday relationships, it's easier to hide your blind spots. You can blame the other person. You can label them as distant, needy, cold, or too emotional. But in twin flame dynamics, something feels different. When conflict arises, it hits deeper. When they withdraw, it activates abandonment fears you didn't realize were still there. When they seem unsure, it mirrors your own hidden uncertainty. When they hesitate, it exposes your fear of not being chosen. You may find yourself asking, why does this affect me so much? Why does their silence feel unbearable? Why does one small shift in energy shake me so deeply? Because it's not just about them. It's about what they awaken within you. The mirror effect forces you to confront parts of yourself you've avoided. And confrontation is uncomfortable. The activation of childhood patterns. Many emotional triggers trace back to early experiences, childhood attachment patterns, past relationships, formative emotional wounds. Twin flames have a way of activating those patterns at lightning speed. If you grew up feeling emotionally unseen, their temporary distance might feel like confirmation of that old narrative. I'm not important enough. If you learned that love is unstable, their mood shifts might feel threatening even if they're minor. If you were taught to suppress your emotions, their emotional intensity might overwhelm you. And when those patterns activate, the nervous system reacts as if you're reliving the past. Suddenly, a simple delayed message feels like rejection. Quiet day feels like abandonment. An honest disagreement feels like impending loss. Instead of calmly expressing your feelings, you may shut down. Because your body isn't responding to the present moment. It's responding to unresolved memory. And that's where silence becomes a defense mechanism. Silence as protection. When old wounds are triggered, the instinct is self-preservation. Some twin flames react by chasing, trying to secure reassurance. Others react by running, withdrawing to regain emotional control. But in both cases, direct, vulnerable communication often becomes difficult. Why? Because speaking openly would require admitting, this situation is activating something painful inside me. And that admission feels raw. Feels like weakness. It feels like exposing scars you've worked hard to conceal. So instead of saying, when you pull away I feel afraid, someone might say nothing at all. Instead of admitting, I'm scared you'll leave, they might act distant first. Because if they withdraw before you do, they feel safer. The mirror effect doesn't just reveal love. It reveals survival strategies. The runner-chaser dynamic, psychological layer. The classic runner-chaser dynamic often appears in twin flame discussions, but beneath the spiritual language lies psychology. The runner is often someone overwhelmed by emotional intensity. They may carry avoidant attachment patterns. When feelings become too strong, their instinct is to create space. The chaser is often someone with anxious attachment patterns. When they sense distance, their instinct is to seek reassurance. Neither role is inherently wrong. Both are responses to fear. But when these patterns collide, communication suffers. The chaser may want to say, please don't leave, but fears appearing needy. The runner may want to say, I care deeply but I'm overwhelmed, but fears losing independence. So instead of speaking honestly, both retreat into their default coping mechanisms. And the silence between them grows, not because love is absent, but because wounds are active. When triggers are misinterpreted. One of the most painful aspects of the mirror effect is misunderstanding. When your twin flame triggers you, It's easy to interpret it as intentional harm. They don't care. They're playing games. They're emotionally unavailable. But often they're triggered too. Your vulnerability may scare them because it exposes their fear of responsibility. Your intensity may overwhelm them because it confronts their own suppressed emotions. Your silence may mirror their own difficulty with expression. Two people both triggered, both feeling deeply, both afraid, and neither fully aware that the discomfort is a reflection, not rejection. Have you ever reacted strongly to something small, and later realized it wasn't about the present situation at all? That's the mirror effect at work. Twin flames don't create new wounds. They shine a light on the old ones. And until those wounds are acknowledged, communication feels risky. The ego's role in triggered states. When wounds activate, the ego steps in to protect. It may say, "Don't text first. Act like you don't care. Protect your pride. Don't give them that power." But underneath pride is fear. Fear of reliving past pain. Fear of being abandoned again. Fear of not being enough. So instead of saying, "I'm hurt," the ego says, "I'm fine." Instead of saying, "I miss you," it says nothing. The tragedy is that both may be feeling the same fear, but ego keeps them from recognizing it in each other. Growth through discomfort. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The mirror effect is not punishment. It's invitation. It invites you to heal what you've avoided. It invites you to face fears you've suppressed. It invites you to grow beyond old survival patterns. But growth rarely feels gentle. When someone triggers your abandonment wound, the easier option is withdrawal. The braver option is reflection. Why does this hurt so much? What is this really reminding me of? Is this about the present or my past? Until those questions are explored, communication remains surface level. Because you can't clearly express feelings you don't fully understand. Why the silence feels so personal? The mirror effect makes everything feel personal. If they go quiet, it feels like a judgment of your worth. If they hesitate, it feels like rejection. If they struggle to express themselves, it feels like lack of love. But often, their silence is about their own triggered wounds, and yours is about yours. Two mirrors facing each other can create infinite reflection. That's why twin flame silence can feel intense and confusing. You're not just dealing with current emotions, you're navigating layers of past pain, subconscious fears, and identity shifts. No wonder speaking openly feels overwhelming. The turning point. The mirror effect becomes less destructive when awareness enters the picture. When you realize, this reaction feels bigger than the situation. This fear feels older than this relationship. This silence might be protection, not indifference. Awareness softens defensiveness. Instead of blaming, you begin observing. Instead of withdrawing automatically, you pause. Instead of assuming the worst, you ask deeper questions. And slowly communication becomes possible again. Not perfect, not effortless, but more conscious. Because when you understand that your twin flame is reflecting your wounds, not attacking your worth, the silence becomes less threatening. It becomes information, and information can lead to healing. In the next part, we'll explore another powerful force that keeps twin flames from speaking openly. Ego, the subtle guardian of pride, control, and emotional self-protection that often stands between love and honesty. If the mirror effect exposes our wounds, then ego steps in to defend them. And ego can be incredibly convincing. It doesn't shout, "I'm afraid." It whispers, "Protect yourself." It doesn't admit, "I'm insecure." It insists, "Maintain your dignity." It doesn't say, "I'm terrified of losing them." It declares, "Don't be the one who cares more." In twin flame connections, where emotions feel magnified and vulnerability feels risky, ego often becomes the silent guardian of the heart. But here's the paradox. The same ego that protects you from temporary pain can also block you from lasting intimacy. What ego really is? Ego isn't evil. It isn't the enemy. It's a psychological structure designed to preserve identity and emotional safety. It wants control. It wants certainty. It wants to avoid humiliation and rejection. And twin flame love threatens all three. Because this connection feels uncontrollable, feels uncertain, and it requires emotional risk. So ego activates. Not dramatically but subtly. It shows up in hesitation, in delayed responses, in pretending you're less invested than you are. It says, let them reach out first. It says, if they really cared, they would say it. It says, don't expose yourself. And before you know it, two people who deeply care about each other are locked in a silent standoff. Both waiting, both guarding, both loving. The fear of losing power. One of ego's greatest concerns is power. Who cares more? Who is more invested? Who will be hurt if this ends? In balanced, emotionally mature love, vulnerability is shared. But when fear is present, vulnerability feels like surrendering leverage. Have you ever wanted to text someone, but stopped yourself because you didn't want to seem too eager? That's ego calculating risk. In twin flame dynamics, because the connection feels so significant, the stakes feel higher. Admitting love feels like handing someone the ability to break you. So ego says, stay composed. Even if your heart says, speak. Pride disguised as strength. Pride often disguises itself as self-respect. And there's a fine line between healthy boundaries and ego-driven silence. Healthy boundary. I will express how I feel honestly and accept the outcome.
Ego-driven pride.
I refuse to speak first because I won't risk looking vulnerable. The difference is subtle but powerful. Pride says, if they want me, they'll prove it. Love says, I care enough to be honest. But pride feels safer. Because if you never confess how deeply you feel, you never risk hearing something you don't want to hear. And so silence becomes a shield. The illusion of indifference. One of ego's most common strategies is emotional detachment. Act unbothered. Act independent. Act unaffected. Even when internally everything feels intense. You may minimize your responses. Delay your replies. Avoid serious conversations. Not because you don't care, but because you care too much. Have you ever caught yourself thinking, if I act like I don't need them, I'll be safer? That's ego attempting control. But here's the problem. When both twin flames do this, they mirror emotional restraint back to each other. And the connection begins to look colder than it actually is. Inside, both may be longing. Outside, both appear composed. The result? Misinterpretation. He must not care. She seems distant. Maybe I imagined it. And ego quietly smiles, believing it has prevented potential pain. Ego and the fear of rejection. At the core of pride is fear of rejection. Not just romantic rejection, but identity rejection. If I admit I love them and they pull away, what does that say about me? Twin flame love often feels intertwined with self-worth. Because it feels rare, significant, meaningful. So the idea of being rejected by someone who feels like your soul mirror can feel devastating. Ego would rather maintain ambiguity than face clear rejection. Ambiguity allows hope. Silence allows imagination. Confession demands clarity. And clarity can hurt. So ego stalls. The standoff dynamic. Here's a common scenario. Both twin flames know the connection is deep. Both feel the pull. Both sense the unspoken truth. But neither wants to lose face. So they wait. If one withdraws slightly, the other withdraws too, not to hurt but to protect. If one becomes quiet, the other mirrors the quiet, not because they don't care, but because they don't want to appear more invested. It becomes a dance of controlled distance. Who will blink first? Who will admit it first? Who will risk it first? And in that dance, time passes. Opportunities shrink. And silence grows heavier. When ego blocks healing. Remember the mirror effect from the previous section? Ego doesn't like being exposed. If your twin flame triggers insecurity, ego's first instinct is not self-reflection. It's defense. They're the problem. They're inconsistent. They don't communicate. Sometimes those concerns are valid, but often, ego uses blame to avoid vulnerability. Because admitting, I'm scared, feels more threatening than saying, you're confusing. Ego resists growth because growth requires humility. It requires saying, I may have overreacted. I may be projecting. I may be afraid. Those admissions dissolve pride. And pride doesn't dissolve easily. The cost of staying guarded. At first, ego protection feels empowering. You feel composed, in control. strategic. But over time something shifts. The unsaid words begin to weigh on you. The what-ifs multiply. You start replaying conversations in your head, imagining what you could have said. Because deep down, ego may protect your pride, but it doesn't satisfy your heart. And twin flame love is not satisfied by surface-level interaction. It longs for authenticity. It longs for emotional honesty. It longs for truth. When ego dominates, the connection becomes tense rather than tender, safe rather than sincere, controlled rather than connected. And eventually, one question emerges. Is protecting my pride worth losing this depth? The turning point: humility. Ego dissolves when humility enters. Humility isn't weakness. It's the courage to say, yes, I care. Yes, I'm afraid. Yes, this matters to me. Humility acknowledges vulnerability without self-judgment. It recognizes that emotional exposure is not defeat. It's bravery. In twin flame dynamics, someone eventually has to step beyond ego. Someone has to risk clarity. Someone has to value connection more than pride. Because silence fueled by ego can last years. But it rarely leads to union. Love versus ego. At its core, this part of the twin flame journey becomes a choice. Ego asks, how do I protect myself? Love asks, how do I express myself? Ego focuses on outcome control. Love focuses on emotional truth. Ego fears humiliation. Love accepts uncertainty. Ego wants guarantees. Love accepts risk. And twin flame growth often requires choosing love over ego, not once but repeatedly. Because intense love doesn't disappear when unspoken. It lingers. And eventually the heart grows tired of silence. The question becomes, will you let pride decide your fate? Or will you allow vulnerability to open a new chapter? In the next section, we'll explore another powerful factor that keeps twin flames from speaking openly: timing and emotional maturity, and why sometimes love arrives before both people are ready to handle it. If ego explains the silence in moments of pride, timing explains the silence in moments of confusion. Because sometimes twin flame love doesn't arrive when life is calm and aligned. It arrives when one or both people are still becoming who they are meant to be. And that changes everything. You can feel deep love for someone and still not be ready to handle it. That is one of the most painful truths in the twin flame journey. When emotional readiness doesn't match the connection. Twin flame connections often feel spiritually aligned, but emotionally uneven. The bond feels profound. The recognition feels immediate. The chemistry feels undeniable. But emotional maturity, that can be at very different stages. One person may be ready to express, to commit, to confront fears directly. The other may still be learning how to regulate emotions, how to communicate vulnerably, how to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. Love may be mutual, but readiness may not be. And when readiness doesn't match, silence fills the gap. The difference between feeling and capacity. There is a crucial distinction here. Feeling love is not the same as having the capacity to sustain it. You can feel deeply and still lack the tools to navigate conflict. You can care intensely and still avoid difficult conversations. You can recognize the connection and still feel overwhelmed by its responsibility. Twin flame love often demands growth. It demands self-awareness. It demands emotional accountability. It demands inner stability. And if one or both partners haven't developed those skills yet, communication becomes strained. Not because the love is weak, but because the emotional container isn't strong enough to hold it. When life circumstances complicate timing, timing is not just emotional, it's practical. Sometimes twin flames meet when a one is in another relationship, a one is building a career and afraid of distraction, a one is healing from past heartbreak, a one is navigating family responsibilities. In these moments, speaking openly can feel like disrupting stability. Even if the heart says, this is important, the mind says, this is complicated. And when heart and logic clash, silence often wins. Because speaking the truth might require life changes. And life changes are not small decisions. The fear of responsibility. There's another layer to timing that's rarely discussed. Twin flame love often feels transformative. It doesn't feel casual. So expressing it openly can feel like stepping into something serious, something life-altering. And not everyone is ready for that responsibility. Admitting, this connection changes me. This matters deeply. This could reshape my life. That's heavy, especially if you are still figuring out who you are. Sometimes silence isn't avoidance of love. It's avoidance of responsibility. Because once you name something powerful, you can't treat it lightly anymore. The runner-chaser dynamic revisited. Growth lens. Earlier, we discussed the runner-chaser dynamic from a wound perspective. But timing adds another dimension. The runner is not always rejecting love. Sometimes they are overwhelmed by growth. The intensity of the connection accelerates self-awareness. They may suddenly confront unhealed trauma, career dissatisfaction, emotional immaturity, fear of commitment, and instead of consciously saying, "I need time to grow," they withdraw, not because they don't care, but because they don't yet know how to handle what this love demands. Meanwhile, the chaser may be further along in emotional readiness. They feel prepared to express, to commit, to communicate, and the imbalance creates tension. One feels urgency, the other feels pressure. Neither is wrong, but the timing is misaligned. Spiritual awakening versus emotional stability. Twin flame narratives often emphasize spiritual awakening. And it's true, these connections can catalyze deep inner transformation. You may become more introspective, more aware of your patterns, more conscious of your fears. But spiritual awakening doesn't automatically equal emotional stability. In fact, awakening can destabilize you at first. When old beliefs crumble and new awareness emerges, you may feel disoriented. And during that disorientation, communication can suffer, because you are still trying to understand yourself. How can you clearly explain what you feel when you are still processing it? Sometimes silence isn't about hiding feelings. It's about not yet having language for them. When growth requires distance, there's a painful but powerful truth in many twin flame journeys. Sometimes separation is part of preparation, not as punishment, not as proof the love isn't real, but as space for growth. If both individuals are triggered, wounded, or immature in certain areas, staying together without growth can create more damage. Distance can force introspection. It can reveal patterns. It can build emotional independence. But from the inside, distance feels like loss. And during that period, communication may be limited, because both are transforming. And transformation is not always articulate. The illusion of, if it's meant to be, it should be easy. One of the biggest misconceptions about twin flames is this: if it's real, it should flow effortlessly. But deep connections often demand evolution. And evolution is uncomfortable. It requires confronting fears, breaking old habits, releasing outdated identities. If one partner resists that evolution, silence becomes easier than growth. Because growth means change. And change threatens stability. When one is awake and the other is still asleep. Sometimes, one twin flame becomes aware of the depth of the connection earlier than the other. They sense its significance. They reflect on its meaning. They want to talk about it. The other may still be processing it subconsciously. They may feel drawn but confused, connected but uncertain, moved but resistant. This mismatch creates tension. If the awakened one pushes for clarity too soon, the other may retreat. If the less aware one feels pressured, ego may activate. And again, silence forms, not because love is absent, but because awareness is uneven. Timing is not rejection. Here's a crucial perspective shift. Not ready does not mean not caring. Not speaking does not always mean not loving. Sometimes it means, I'm still becoming. I'm still healing. I'm still learning how to hold this. Twin flame love often arrives as a catalyst. But catalyst can feel disruptive. And disruption takes time to integrate. The hard question. So the real question becomes, are you willing to allow growth without forcing timing? Because forcing communication before emotional maturity exists can backfire. But avoiding communication forever also prevents evolution. There's a balance. Growth requires patience but also courage. At some point, readiness must be chosen. Because waiting for perfect timing can become another form of avoidance. Love and readiness must meet. Twin flame union, emotional or physical, requires both love and capacity. Love ignites the connection. Capacity sustains it. And capacity is built through self-reflection, emotional regulation, accountability, humility, healing. Without these, intensity turns chaotic. With them, intensity turns transformative. Silence in twin flame dynamics is often the space where maturity is being built, even if invisibly. But eventually, the moment comes when growth demands expression. Because love that matures seeks clarity. It no longer hides behind pride. It no longer blames timing. It no longer waits indefinitely. It says, I am ready to speak, not because I'm certain of the outcome, but because I'm certain of my truth. In the next section, we'll explore another subtle but powerful reason twin flames remain silent. The fear that speaking openly might disrupt the fragile connection they're trying so desperately to preserve. There is a quiet paradox that lives inside many twin flame connections. Sounds like this: if I say what I really feel, I might lose them. And so nothing is said. No confession. No clarification. No confrontation. No truth that could shake the fragile balance. Just silence, heavy, protective, loaded with everything unsaid. But here's the question no one wants to face. If the connection is truly that strong, why does it feel so fragile? The illusion of safety and silence. When two twin flames come together, the emotional intensity can feel overwhelming. It's not just attraction. It's recognition. It's as if something ancient wakes up. And when something feels sacred, people instinctively try to protect it. Silence can feel like protection. If I don't bring up what's bothering me, we won't fight. If I don't confess how deeply I feel, I won't scare them. If I don't ask where this is going, I won't force a decision. Feels strategic, careful, mature even. But what's really happening underneath? Fear. Not fear of love. Fear of losing access to love. And when someone has tasted the kind of connection that twin flames share, the thought of losing it can feel unbearable. So they choose the option that feels safest in the moment. Don't rock the boat. When love feels too precious to risk. Imagine this scenario. Two people meet and instantly feel that electric recognition. Conversations flow effortlessly. Eye contact lingers a little too long. There is comfort but also intensity. They both know something is different, but neither says it. Weeks pass. Months pass. The connection deepens, yet no one defines it. Why? Because defining something gives it shape. And once something has shape, it can be broken. As long as everything remains ambiguous, it can't technically end. It just exists in that beautiful in-between. But here's the cost of that ambiguity. Emotional tension builds in the silence. One person wants reassurance. The other wants clarity. Both want vulnerability. Neither wants to be the first to speak. And so they protect the connection by starving it of truth. The fear of conflict. For many twin flames, the intensity of the connection amplifies emotional reactions. Small misunderstandings can feel huge. Minor disagreements can feel like existential threats. Why? Because it doesn't feel like just another relationship. Feels fated, cosmic, meant to be. So when conflict arises, it doesn't feel ordinary. Feels catastrophic. What if this argument pushes them away? What if they decide this is too much? What if I reveal something they can't handle? And so instead of addressing issues directly, one or both choose silence. They suppress discomfort. They avoid hard conversations. They smile when they feel hurt. They withdraw instead of expressing. All in the name of protecting the connection. But what they don't realize is this. Unspoken resentment doesn't disappear. It accumulates. And silence over time becomes distance. The fragile fantasy. Sometimes twin flames fall in love not only with each other but with the idea of each other. The version untouched by conflict. The version untested by reality. The version preserved in longing. Silence helps maintain that fantasy. As long as certain topics aren't discussed, commitment, fears, past wounds, expectations, the connection remains suspended in a kind of emotional perfection. But perfection is fragile. Real love requires friction. Real intimacy requires truth. And truth risks disappointment. So the question becomes, is it better to preserve a beautiful illusion, or risk everything for something real? Many twin flames unconsciously choose the illusion, at least at first. When speaking feels like demanding, there's another layer to this fear. Sometimes expressing needs feels like asking for too much. One twin flame might think, if I tell them I need more consistency, they'll feel pressured. If I say I want commitment, they'll run. If I admit how deeply I love them, they'll feel trapped. So instead of communicating, they minimize themselves. They accept crumbs. They accept ambiguity. They accept emotional half measures. Not because they don't crave more, but because they fear that asking for more will destroy what little they have. But here's a powerful truth. If your needs can destroy the connection, the silence is already doing it. The runner's silent strategy. In the classic runner-chaser dynamic, silence often becomes a shield. The runner feels overwhelmed by intensity. Instead of articulating that fear, they withdraw. Why explain confusion when you can avoid it? Why admit vulnerability when you can disappear? From the outside it looks cold, but internally it may be self-protection. They may think, if I stay silent, I won't say something I regret. If I pull away quietly, I won't hurt them directly. But the irony is this: silence hurts more than honesty. Being ignored feels like rejection. Being left without explanation feels like abandonment. And yet, to the one who withdraws, silence feels kinder than confrontation. The chaser's silent suffering. On the other side, the chaser may also choose silence, but for different reasons. They might feel deeply hurt by distance or inconsistency, yet they don't speak up. Why? Because they fear confirming their worst nightmare. What if I ask, and they say they don't feel the same? What if I bring up the distance and they say they need space? What if the truth ends the hope? So they tolerate confusion. They replay conversations in their head. They analyze every message. They wait. Waiting becomes safer than knowing. But hope without clarity slowly turns into anxiety. And anxiety is not love. It's fear disguised as attachment. The energy shift that happens when someone finally speaks. There's always a turning point in twin flame journeys. A moment when the silence becomes heavier than the risk of truth. Maybe it's after months of uncertainty. Maybe it's after a separation. Maybe it's after realizing that protecting the connection is costing self-respect. And then one person decides, I can't keep pretending. I would rather lose this connection than lose myself. I deserve honesty, even if it changes everything. And they speak. Not perfectly. Not without trembling. But honestly. And here's the surprising part. Sometimes the connection strengthens. Because truth clears distortion. Clarity dissolves anxiety. Vulnerability invites vulnerability. And even if the outcome isn't what they hoped, there is peace in knowing they showed up authentically. The deeper spiritual lesson. Silence in twin flame connections often teaches a profound lesson. You cannot preserve love by abandoning yourself. The fear of disruption reveals attachment. The willingness to speak reveals growth. Real spiritual union isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about navigating it with courage. It's about saying, this is how I feel. This is what I need. This is where I stand. Without manipulation. Without ultimatums. Without fear-based silence. Because love that cannot survive truth was never meant to evolve. A question for you. If you're watching this, ask yourself honestly, what are you not saying? Are you protecting the connection? Or are you protecting yourself from possible pain? Is your silence an act of love? Or an act of fear? And what might happen? Not in fantasy, not in worst-case scenarios, but in reality. If you finally allowed your truth to be heard, silence can feel safe. But growth begins when someone chooses courage over comfort. And in twin flame connections, sometimes the greatest act of love is not holding on quietly. It's speaking, even if your voice shakes. There is a truth about twin flame connections that people don't talk about enough. Sometimes the silence has nothing to do with the intensity of love. It has everything to do with real life. Because love does not exist in a vacuum. It exists inside careers, inside marriages, inside families, inside cultures, inside expectations, inside responsibilities that were built long before the twin flame appeared. And when destiny collides with reality, Silence often becomes the only language that feels survivable. When love arrives at the wrong time, imagine this. Two people meet. The recognition is immediate. The emotional charge is undeniable. Feels like something ancient waking up. But one of them is already in a committed relationship, or building a career that demands everything, or living in a different country, or bound by family expectations that feel immovable. The connection feels right. The timing feels impossible. And so begins the internal war. What does this mean? Why now? How can something feel so aligned and so complicated? Instead of speaking openly about the depth of the connection, they minimize it. It's just attraction. It's just a phase. It's just bad timing. But the feelings don't disappear. They intensify in silence. Because when something feels fated, suppressing it doesn't erase it, buries it alive. The weight of existing commitments. One of the most common reasons twin flames don't speak openly is this. There is something already in place. A spouse, a long-term partner, children, shared finances, shared history. And the fear is not just about losing love. It's about unraveling an entire life. Ending a relationship doesn't only affect two people. It affects families, friendships, social circles, stability, identity. So even if the twin flame connection feels deeper, more aligned, more authentic, the cost of acting on it feels overwhelming. And so they choose silence. Not because the love isn't real, but because the consequences are. Cultural and family expectations. In some cases, the obstacle isn't a current relationship. It's external expectation. Different religions, different ethnic backgrounds, different social classes, family disapproval, community pressure. In certain cultures, choosing love over duty can mean losing family support entirely. And for someone raised to prioritize loyalty, sacrifice, and obedience, the decision isn't simple. They might think, if I choose this connection, I betray my family. If I follow my heart, I destroy everything I was taught to honor. If I speak openly about how I feel, I create chaos. So they remain quiet. They convince themselves that silence is maturity, that repression is responsibility, that emotional sacrifice is strength. But inside, something feels unfinished. Because the heart doesn't respond to social logic. It responds to truth, career distance, and practical barriers. Not every obstacle is dramatic. Sometimes it's geography. One lives across the world, different time zones, visa issues, financial instability, or career ambition. One twin flame may be in the middle of building something important, a business, a professional reputation, a long-term goal that requires total focus. And the intensity of the connection feels like a distraction, or worse, a risk. What if I choose love and lose everything I've worked for? What if this connection derails my path? What if we try and fail and I regret sacrificing my stability? So instead of exploring the depth of their feelings openly, they compartmentalize. They keep conversations light. They avoid emotional declarations. They pretend the bond is smaller than it is. Not because they don't feel it, but because they're afraid of the practical consequences of feeling it fully. The internal split, heart versus logic. This is where the deepest tension lives. The heart says, this is once in a lifetime. This feels like home. This is different. The mind says, this is complicated. This is risky. This could destroy everything. And when heart and logic are at war, many choose logic. As logic feels safe, predictable, controlled. But choosing logic doesn't silence the heart. It just creates inner conflict. That conflict often shows up as emotional withdrawal, inconsistency, mixed signals. One day they're warm, the next distant. Not because they're playing games, but because they are torn between two realities. And when someone is torn internally, speaking openly becomes almost impossible. How can you explain something you haven't resolved inside yourself? Guilt, the silent barrier. Guilt is another powerful force. If one twin flame is already committed elsewhere, even emotionally exploring the new connection can feel like betrayal. So they suppress it. They deny it. They reduce contact. They may feel unworthy of happiness. or ashamed of their feelings. Instead of saying, "This connection is confusing me," they say nothing, because admitting it out loud makes it real. And reality demands action. Silence delays action. The fear of being the villain. Sometimes speaking openly about twin flame love means someone gets hurt. And many people fear being the one who causes pain. What if I break someone's heart? What if I'm judged? What if people see me as selfish? So they choose self-denial over public scrutiny. They choose quiet longing over visible disruption. But here's the hidden truth. Avoiding short-term discomfort often creates long-term regret. Years later, people look back and wonder, what if I had been brave? What if I had at least said how I felt? Silence protects reputation, but it can wound the soul. Are you choosing stability or fear? There is nothing wrong with honoring responsibilities. There is nothing wrong with choosing family, or career, or stability. The real question is not whether external circumstances matter. They do. The real question is this: are you making a conscious choice? Or are you hiding behind circumstances to avoid emotional risk? Because sometimes bad timing is real, and sometimes it's a shield. Sometimes responsibility is integrity, and sometimes it's fear disguised as duty. Only the individual can know the difference. The spiritual paradox of twin flames. Twin flame connections often arrive not to destroy lives, but to awaken truth. Sometimes that truth leads to union. Sometimes it leads to growth apart. Sometimes it forces reevaluation of everything you thought you wanted. But avoiding the truth rarely brings peace. Silence might maintain structure, but it doesn't resolve longing. And longing, when suppressed long enough, turns into restlessness. The courage to face reality. Speaking openly in the face of external obstacles doesn't mean recklessly abandoning responsibility. It means acknowledging reality honestly. It might sound like, this connection is real, but my life is complicated. I care deeply about you, but I need time to figure out my path. I can't promise anything right now, but I don't want to pretend this doesn't matter. That kind of honesty doesn't guarantee a fairy tale outcome, but it does guarantee integrity. And integrity is what allows a connection, whether it continues or not, to remain respectful instead of painful. A question for you. If you are in a twin flame connection complicated by circumstances, ask yourself, are you silent because it's truly the wisest path? Or are you silent because you're afraid of the changes truth might require? If everything in your external world were neutral, no expectations, no obligations, no fear of judgment, would you speak differently? Would you choose differently? Would you love differently? External circumstances can delay love. They can challenge love. They can reshape love. But they cannot erase what is real. Eventually, every soul must decide, is safety more important than authenticity? And that decision is where silence either continues or finally breaks. At some point in the twin flame journey, a realization begins to surface, slowly, quietly, almost reluctantly. Maybe the silence isn't just an obstacle. Maybe it's a lesson. Because when two souls feel such profound intensity, and yet cannot seem to communicate openly, it forces something deeper to happen. It forces growth. And growth rarely feels comfortable. When silence becomes a mirror. In the early stages of a twin flame connection, the focus is usually outward. What are they thinking? Why haven't they reached out? Why won't they say how they feel? Why are they running? The attention stays on the other person. But silence has a strange way of turning the spotlight inward. When there are no answers coming from them, you are left alone with yourself. And that's when the real work begins. Because without constant reassurance, without clear labels, without predictable communication, you are forced to confront your own patterns. Your attachment style. Your fears of abandonment. Your fear of rejection. Your need for validation. Your discomfort with uncertainty. Silence doesn't just hide the other person. It reveals you. The lesson of self-worth. One of the deepest spiritual lessons in twin flame silence is self-worth. When someone you love intensely doesn't speak openly, it can trigger painful thoughts. Am I not enough? If they really loved me, wouldn't they say it? Why am I the one who feels more? But here's the transformative shift. Your worth is not determined by someone else's readiness to communicate. Their silence is not a measurement of your value. It's often a reflection of their own fear, immaturity, confusion, or internal conflict. And the moment you stop interpreting silence as rejection and start seeing it as information, you reclaim power. You begin to ask different questions. Do I accept this dynamic? Does this align with the love I believe I deserve? Am I abandoning myself to keep this connection? That's where spiritual growth begins. Learning emotional independence. Twin flame love can feel addictive. The energy, the intensity, the recognition, the synchronicities. It can create the illusion that your wholeness depends on the other person. But silence shatters that illusion. When communication disappears or becomes inconsistent, you are forced to stand alone. And in that solitude, something powerful can emerge. Emotional independence. Instead of waiting anxiously for messages, instead of obsessively checking signs, instead of tying your mood to their behavior, you begin to build stability within yourself. You learn to self-soothe, to regulate emotions, to find purpose outside the connection. And ironically, this inner grounding often shifts the dynamic. Because twin flame journeys are not about dependency. They are about evolution, breaking the attachment cycle. Silence also exposes attachment wounds. For someone with anxious tendencies, silence feels like abandonment. For someone with avoidant tendencies, silence feels like safety. Twin flames often trigger opposite attachment patterns in each other. One chases, one withdraws, one demands clarity, one fears pressure. And until both individuals heal those patterns internally, open communication feels threatening. The spiritual lesson here isn't how to make them talk. It's how to heal the part of you that panics when they don't. Because once you are no longer operating from fear of loss, you speak differently, not from desperation, not from demand, but from grounded clarity. And that kind of energy changes everything. Silence is sacred space. We often see silence as negative, but sometimes silence creates sacred space. Space for reflection, space for integration, space for growth. In that space, you begin to ask, who am I outside this connection? What do I truly want in partnership? What patterns have I repeated in past relationships? What am I being shown about myself right now? Without silence, you might stay distracted by intensity. With silence, you are invited into introspection. And introspection leads to transformation. Union within before union without. There is a spiritual concept often misunderstood in twin flame narratives. Before union with the other comes union within. What does that mean? It means integrating your own light and shadow, balancing your masculine and feminine energies internally, healing childhood wounds, strengthening boundaries, cultivating self-love. If you rely on the other person to complete you, validate you, or stabilize you, the connection will feel chaotic. But when you cultivate internal wholeness, you approach the connection differently. You no longer fear silence. You observe it. You no longer beg for clarity. You embody it. You no longer shrink to maintain connection. You honor yourself, even if that means walking away. That is spiritual maturity. And twin flame silence often forces it. The shift from obsession to awareness. In the beginning, silence can create obsession. Endless analysis. Tarot readings.
Astrology charts.
Replaying conversations. Searching for hidden meanings. But over time, if you allow yourself to grow, obsession softens into awareness. You realize, not every delay is divine timing. Not every withdrawal is a test. Not every painful dynamic is meant to be endured. Sometimes, silence is simply showing you what you are tolerating. And once you see clearly, you have a choice. Growth doesn't mean the love disappears. It means you relate to it differently. Acceptance, the highest lesson. One of the most profound spiritual lessons behind silence is acceptance. Acceptance that you cannot control another person's healing timeline. Acceptance that love does not override free will. Acceptance that connection does not guarantee readiness. You can love someone deeply. You can feel spiritually aligned. You can recognize them on a soul level. And still, they may not be capable of showing up the way you need. Acceptance is not resignation. It's clarity without resistance. It's saying, I honor what this connection is, and I honor what it is not. And from that place, peace begins. When silence ends. Interestingly, when the spiritual lesson is integrated, the dynamic often shifts. Either the other person feels the energetic change and steps forward, or you no longer need them to. Both outcomes are growth. Because the ultimate purpose of a twin flame connection is not romantic fantasy. It's awakening. Awakening to your patterns, your wounds, your strength, your worth, your boundaries, your capacity for unconditional love, including for yourself. A reflection for you. If you are experiencing silence right now, ask yourself, what is this teaching me? Is it teaching patience or self-respect? Is it teaching surrender or boundaries? Is it teaching faith or discernment? Sometimes the lesson isn't about waiting. Sometimes it's about choosing yourself. And when you choose yourself, not from anger, not from ego, but from deep inner alignment, something powerful happens. You stop chasing. You stop fearing. You stop shrinking. You become whole. And from wholeness, any connection, twin flame or not, becomes healthier. The truth about spiritual love. True spiritual love does not require self-abandonment. It does not require tolerating confusion indefinitely. It does not demand silence as proof of devotion. Calls you higher. Stretches you. It refines you. Transforms you. And sometimes it uses silence as the catalyst. Not to punish you, but to prepare you. Because when two people finally come together in conscious union, if they do, it is not from need. It is from wholeness. And that kind of union can only be built on truth. After all the silence, after the confusion, the distance, the unsent messages, the conversations rehearsed in your head but never voiced, there comes a moment in every twin flame journey when something inside you shifts. Not because the other person changed, not because the timing suddenly became perfect, not because the obstacles magically disappeared, but because you did. And that shift changes everything. The turning point. At first, the silence feels unbearable. You analyze it. You personalize it. You try to decode it. You wonder, are they thinking about me? Do they feel this too? Why can't they just say it? But over time, the questions evolve. Instead of asking what they feel, you begin asking, what do I feel? What do I need? What am I afraid to say? And that is the turning point. Because twin flame love, at its highest expression, is not about telepathy or destiny or dramatic longing. It is about courage. The courage to speak truth. The courage to risk rejection. The courage to stand in emotional nakedness without guarantees. Love that hides versus love that grows. There are two versions of intense love. One hides to survive. The other speaks to evolve. Love that hides says, if I don't say anything, I won't lose them. Love that grows says, if I can't be honest, I've already lost myself. Silence may preserve connection temporarily, but honesty builds intimacy. And intimacy is what twin flames truly crave. Not just intensity. Intensity is easy. It happens naturally. Intimacy requires vulnerability. And vulnerability requires voice. The power of speaking. Even if your voice shakes. There is something transformative about saying the words you've been holding in. Not dramatically, not with pressure, not with expectation, but calmly, clearly, truthfully. It might sound like, this connection means more to me than I've admitted. I've been afraid to say how deeply I feel. I don't want to keep pretending this is casual. I need clarity even if it's uncomfortable. Will it guarantee the outcome you want? No, but it guarantees something more important. Self-respect. Because every time you silence yourself to maintain connection, you send your nervous system a message. My truth is negotiable. And over time that erodes confidence. But when you speak, regardless of the response, you rebuild trust with yourself. And that internal trust is magnetic. What if they walk away? This is the fear beneath all silence. What if I speak and they leave? But here's a deeper question. If honesty makes them leave, were they truly aligned with you? Real love does not collapse under truth. It may wobble. It may need adjustment. It may require growth. But it does not disappear simply because someone expressed their heart. If someone cannot handle your vulnerability, they are not ready for the depth they claim to feel. And that realization, while painful, is freeing, because it shifts you from chasing potential to honoring reality. When both are ready, there is something incredibly powerful that happens when two twin flames finally outgrow fear. When both have done the inner work, when both have faced their wounds, when both value truth more than ego protection, the dynamic softens. Conversations become real. Defensiveness decreases. Silence no longer feels like a weapon. Instead of, "Who will speak first?" becomes, "How can we understand each other better?" Instead of, "I hope they guess how I feel," becomes, "I want you to know how I feel." That is conscious love. Not reactive. Not avoidant. Not prideful. But intentional. And if union doesn't happen, this is something many avoid discussing. Sometimes even after growth, even after honesty, even after courage, the two people still choose separate paths. And that does not mean the connection was false. It means the lesson was fulfilled. Some twin flames come into your life not to stay, but to awaken you, to show you your capacity for depth, to reveal your unhealed wounds, to activate your evolution. And once the awakening occurs, clinging is no longer necessary, because the real union was internal. You met the part of yourself that was afraid. You healed the part that felt unworthy. You strengthened the part that avoided confrontation. And that transformation changes every future relationship. The invitation to the viewer. So now let me ask you something honestly. If the person you're thinking about were sitting in front of you right now, what would you say? Would you finally admit how deeply you feel? Would you express the hurt you've been hiding? Would you ask for clarity? Or would you stay silent again? And if you choose silence, ask yourself why. Is it wisdom? Or is it fear wearing the mask of patience? Because life is unpredictable. Timing is fragile. Opportunities are not infinite. And unspoken love can become lifelong regret. The higher expression of twin flame love. At its highest level, twin flame love is not about dramatic separations or mystical longing. It is about radical authenticity. It is about loving without manipulation, speaking without games, expressing without ego. It is about saying, "I care about you. I value this connection. And I value myself enough to be honest." That is powerful. That is mature. That is spiritual. Because true spirituality is not silent suffering. It is conscious choice. A new definition of strength. Many people think strength is restraint, control, composure, silence. But real strength is emotional transparency. It is the ability to say, "I'm scared. I feel vulnerable. I don't want to lose you. But I don't want to lose myself either." When you reach that level of honesty, something shifts energetically. You stop trying to control the outcome. You start trusting that whatever happens will align with your growth. And from that place, love becomes lighter. Not because it's less deep, but because it's less fearful. If twin flames are mirrors, then silence is simply reflecting the places where courage has not yet bloomed. But courage can be learned. Vulnerability can be practiced. Communication can be developed. And love, real love, is not afraid of growth. So whether you are in reunion, in separation, in confusion, or in quiet longing, remember this. Your voice matters. Your feelings matter. And the right connection will not punish you for speaking truth. It will rise to meet it. If this resonated with you, take a moment right now. In the comments, share one thing you've been afraid to say in your twin flame journey. Not to them. Just here. Just as practice. Just as release. And if you're ready to explore deeper truths about twin flame growth, healing, and conscious union, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Because this journey isn't about chasing love. It's about becoming someone who can hold it fully, openly, and fearlessly. And that begins the moment you decide to let love speak.